Welcome to the Color of Influence podcast, where you will hear conversations from influential people of color from around the world, from social media, and right here in your communities. These behind the scenes conversations will motivate you, inspire you, and encourage you. I am your host, Aisha Morgan, and let's meet today's guest. On today's episode, our guest is Justin Hall. Justin and I are in a podcast group together where we bounce different ideas off of each other and let each other know when we have projects coming up. And he recently wrote a book called Aiden Spots about having vitiligo, but he also has a podcast called Grindpreneur. So today we talk a little bit about his book, a little bit about Grindpreneur, and just his life having vitiligo. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest, Justin Hall. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Color of Influence podcast. We are here with Justin Hall. Justin and I are in a podcast group together where we share information about our projects. We give each other tips. It's an amazing group that was started a couple of months ago. Well, really more than a couple months ago, but this fall. And we have been able to learn a lot from each other and to have each other on each other's podcast. So I'm going to let Justin introduce himself, and then we're going to get right into our conversation.
Great. How you doing? I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad we were finally able to connect today.
Yes.
But my name is Justin Hall. I also go by the Grindpreneur. So I have a podcast called The Grind Chronicles, as well as two podcasts, actually. Another one called No, It's Vitiligo, Stories of the 1%. So with The Grind Chronicles, I essentially talk to a whole lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners, and trying to get the nuts and bolts on how they started their business. And it's a lot of podcasts you listen to that have some great entrepreneurs. It's cool to hear Elon Musk talk about how he raised billions, but sometimes it's important to speak to the local dry cleaner and figure out how he got that initial loan to start his business,
Right.
or the person that owns the local dance studio, and find out how he or she got their first client and were able to stay there for the last 10 years. So those are the entrepreneurs I try to tackle that are tangible, people that you and I can reach out to, and that have stories that sometimes more closely relate to our story.
Right.
Where we worked a second job to finance that business, more so than an entrepreneur who raised a couple $100 million in a seed of investment. So,
Exactly.
and then with our vitiligo podcast, I have vitiligo, and so I speak to a lot of other people with vitiligo. We are about 1% of the global population. Roughly 50 million Americans have vitiligo. So that's actually more cases this year than cancer. Not at all to compare it to cancer, but most of us know someone who knows someone who has cancer, or
Right.
And vitiligo is autoimmune disorder, comparable to, say, lupus or arthritis,
Okay.
rheumatoid arthritis, excuse me. And so essentially it's a autoimmune disorder where your pigment cells essentially are killing other pigment cells. And that causes the loss of pigment. So, with our stories, I'm trying to do my part in getting the word out there, awareness, and it's not a autoimmune disorder that will kill you or really put you in any kind of discomfort or pain. But what it does create are a lot of mental stigmas and a lot of things that, during the course of the podcast, and as we've been working on a documentary, we've encountered people that are shut-ins, people that say, hey, I haven't left my house in 15 years. And
Wow.
COVID was a blessing because I got to wear a mask. And so I started going out more, or I been in my house for so many years. And with technology, with the Door Dashes and Uber Eats, it made my life so much easier because I didn't want to go out. So like I said, it won't kill you, but the mental repercussions are, enormous. And I personally hadn't had a lot of those battles that a lot of the people I interview have, but
Hmm.
it's important to get the word out there because it's, you if you don't know anybody or know somebody, you've probably seen someone with vitiligo, and maybe now you'll know when you encounter that person in the grocery store. And I get questions all the time, which is fine, but sometimes other people in our community don't like the questions or don't know. And people ask, were you burned? Were you hurt? Does
Yeah.
it those things? And so it's great to be able to answer a lot of those questions and help spread awareness to vitiligo.
Okay. Now, how do you find your guests for your podcast and then for your documentary as well?
Yeah, so for the vitiligo, I am a part of several vitiligo organizations.
Okay.
Matter of fact, the I just got back last week from the World Vitiligo Conference. So that travels around the world, and so I got to meet thousands of people, other people with vitiligo, and
Hmm.
connect with them. And matter of fact, I've been tasked, it was just announced, myself and two other Atlanta community members, Alicia Archibald and Perry Whaley, that have their own foundations. I don't actually have a foundation, but the three of us have been tasked with hosting the world in 2023 for
Wow.
the World Vitiligo Conference. So people from around the world will be, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. So people around the world will be here in Atlanta with the World Vitiligo Conference of 2023. It will be June 23rd through 25th. So
Okay.
we've already got to work because we have a lot to do to get ready for hosting this event. I mean, it's equivalent to hosting the World Cup or the Super Bowl, much smaller amounts of people, but still the same amount of events and festivities. And we're catering to people that have traveled all around the globe to get here.
Yeah.
Um, World Vitiligo Day is always June 25th each year. The event normally falls over the course of those, around those days, June 25th. So just being a part of groups and communities, how I meet people for that podcast. And even before, um, when I first started really meeting people through groups, there was text lines and chat lines. This is 2011 and 12, but now with social media,
Right.
there's so many vitiligo groups, so many chat groups, pages. Um, with my Know It's Vitiligo, podcasts and a documentary page. I have so many people that contact me through there on Instagram or other places. So it's so we were able to stay connected and meet people. When I meet people at events, I ask them, do you feel comfortable telling me your story? Or and I want their story to help other people. That's the main reason behind the podcast. During our last World Vitiligo meeting, we had breakout groups, and we had some groups with just men and just women. And meeting with both groups afterwards, a lot of the women spoke about, that you weren't in relationships, saying, I feel it's really hard sometimes just meeting people or approaching people with vitiligo, or people don't approach me because of my vitiligo.
Hmm.
And they say it has to be so much easier for men. But meanwhile, across the conference area in the men's breakout groups, men were saying the exact same thing. Man, I wish I was a woman because it'd be maybe more acceptable if I wore makeup. And I feel if you're a beautiful woman, it's so much easier to be approached. And men and women were saying the exact same thing, but they felt it was easier for the opposite gender. So with our podcast, when we talk to people and talk to groups, and with the documentary, we want to show that it's so many things similar, and also get the story that also too that you'll find too that a lot of those stigmas are things you created yourself, that most people aren't, that's not their concern when they're
Right.
talking to you or meeting you. And most of your family and friends don't even realize you have vitiligo, whether you're have 10% pigment loss or 100% pigment loss. It's and sometimes those harsh truths that we discover in our groups and within our podcast, that hey, sometimes maybe it wasn't the world, maybe this was you to a certain extent. If you
Yeah.
haven't left your house in years, maybe it's not the world, maybe it's you. Maybe we need to work on those parts to see what's going on.
Yeah.
So
So you talked a little bit about like the mental health aspect.
yes.
Now, how do you recommend that individuals go to someone who has vitiligo as a therapist, or is it more of like a specialty? Like, how would they find someone to
Yeah,
be their therapist?
I think that is very hard. And honestly, I don't know if there are any. Um, I'm sure there are, but I don't know of any particular therapists that have vitiligo.
Okay.
And what happens, a lot of people, when you do see a doctor or specialist that is aware of it, doctors have teams and collections of therapists that they recommend that they
Okay.
feel would good. And it's just like going to a good doctor. A doctor I went to at one point, she had never seen vitiligo outside of a textbook, and B, she had never had a patient of color ever.
Mm,
So,
okay.
and I realized that was just not a good fit for me. So you also have to find somebody that's a good fit for you, and hopefully, if they're a good therapist or psychologist, psychotherapist, they have dealt with other things that ail people physically, that so they should be able to hopefully connect with you in there. But I do recommend always, if you could see somebody to talk. And part of what I travel around speaking about is the power of telling your story.
Mm-hmm.
Telling your story within itself is cathartic and helpful. And so many people that I have urged to go on stage and tell their story, especially their vitiligo story, it helps them because it's healing just to say it, because you processing it and saying some things out loud help you realize maybe some things that maybe you took a misstep in, and you look at it from outside of yourself when you're saying something out loud, like, wow, I can't believe I really refused to go to this wedding because of my vitiligo, when you say it out loud. And
Yeah.
then also you meet people and have people in the crowd that say, oh, I was just like you. The one thing I found with vitiligo is most of the people you speak to, because it is such a small minority of us, even though 1% is a lot in the scheme of 700 billion people on the planet. So if there's almost a billion people with it, that's still a lot of people. But in the scheme of things, most people don't have neighbors or friends, other friends with vitiligo. So the thing is, a lot of people think, oh, it's just me going through it. No one
Right.
else feels like this. It's just me. And so when you tell your story, you realize that it's not just you. There's so many other people that are going through the exact same thing that you're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the popularity of Winnie Harlow, do you feel as though it has positively impacted the community?
We hope so. I mean, now you're starting to see commercials with people. You'll see commercials. Nike has a big ad with a, not only she has vitiligo, but plus size model with vitiligo that I've seen the big billboard with her, and I've seen it other places on Nike as well. So it's getting acceptance, which, or getting, that helps, because that also, it's going to bring attention to the disorder and how it can be corrected. Like I said, you won't die from it. So that also keeps people from investing money and time into a cure.
Right.
And I spoke to a doctor who specializes in vitiligo at our conference in the end of June, and he said that he specialized in and forgive me, I forget the disorder, but it's not autoimmune, but it's a disorder of the brain,
Mm-hmm.
and this will kill people. Not to take away its seriousness, but he went to a conference and this disorder only affects like 0.004 of our population, very small minimum. But he went to a conference, and there was almost 3,000 doctors that have begun specializing in this
Oh,
brain
wow.
disorder. And they realized at the conference that there was almost like a 1-to-1 doctor ratio in the US of
Right.
doctors that specialize. There's almost more doctors that specialize in this order than there's people actually getting the disorder, which
Mm-hmm.
is not to take away from the seriousness, but it also made him realize that in the US there's only 5 specialists that work with vitiligo. I mean, there's
Really?
dermatologists all over that have seen vitiligo, but doctors that have made it their career path for
Yeah.
vitiligo, there's only 5. And
Wow.
so that's compared to in the US, roughly 40 million people with vitiligo and growing. So the thing is, it's the awareness. This other disorder, I should know the name, but it has more awareness, and it's linked to a specialized kind of brain cancer. So there's foundations, there's organizations, there's dinners, there's all these things that go into it. So the awareness and the people trying to get into the field and the money, which is always important, is
Right.
there.
Yeah.
So with Winnie Harlow and people in commercials, it does help, and we're starting to see the change. But and even if it's not a change for just a cure, if we can have a change to help the mental aspect of the disease, that would be even more help, because high there is a large number of suicides linked, and we can't always say it's just linked to the vitiligo, but if you look at people that have vitiligo and compare them to people that are not, based on that have committed suicide, you
Mm-hmm.
can see a high trend there. So I'm ecstatic with the Winnie Harlows, and we're trying to get the Winnie Harlows and the people that have it to our conferences to speak, to get that
Yeah.
awareness out there.
Yeah. That would be great. And that was going to be my next question. Like, does she attend the
She has not attended one yet, but we are working on that for Atlanta. So
okay.
we have made some contacts. Anybody listening that has a bug or ear to someone in her, tell her we would love to have her in Atlanta for June 25th in Atlanta for the World Vitiligo Conference
Yeah.
2023. So we definitely have been working on her, as well as some other bigger named people that have vitiligo as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully someone can make a connection and she ends up showing up and, being your keynote speaker or whatever you guys need her to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we would love that. Yeah, we have her and 2 other people we have, and it's kind of weird. There are some celebrities out there that we know for a fact have vitiligo, but don't express it, don't share it, and
Mm,
they cover it up with makeup. So when we have reached out to them, that makes it kind of hard.
right.
Um, but through the world of Instagram and social media, not every picture you take or someone takes of you is, in this day and age, are you always going to have 100% makeup done, or
Right.
100.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see these people. So our hope is that they would love to be a part of the organization or part of the convention,
Hmm.
and speak, because we think they would shed so much light on it too, and also help other people. I spoke to a woman last convention whose husband was in a horrible car accident, and the police came together because it happened close to her house.
Hmm.
And she lives in like Philadelphia, so it wasn't that far. Police knew the husband, knew her, showed up at her house. So like, ma'am, your husband was in a horrible car accident 4 blocks over. she couldn't even open the door for the police because she had no makeup on.
Uh,
No one had, outside of her husband for 12 years, had seen her without any makeup on.
yeah.
And so it was really touch and go for her husband at first, but thank goodness he made it. But if he hadn't made it, she would have not seen him, because it took her 3 hours to get to the hospital because she couldn't face leaving her house just in her state that she was in.
Right.
And so, our goal in having, especially people that have higher profiles, that, don't go anywhere without a stylist or makeup artist, if they can come out and say, look, I've had vitiligo for 10 years. It's normally covered. And if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
And also it's, there's other people of non-color. It affects everyone. The
I was
people
gonna
of
ask that, like, is this something just that affects people of color?
No, just the stigma is probably more there with people of color because it's so much more noticeable. Because
Okay.
when your pigment disappears, you
Right.
look completely different. And there's people that are non-color that you could definitely tell and see. And in the conference this year was great. There was so many people of non-color and that spoke. And I personally learned something because I was taken aback of hearing how many of them said, as a young, or not young man now, but middle-aged gentleman that had vitiligo since birth, and
Hmm.
he was white, and it wasn't super noticeable, but noticeable enough, and also he was some of people where it affects them. If you have vitiligo where your hair is, you'll just have white hair there. So as a child, I could see how that would be disturbing, and kids didn't understand, and that affected a great deal of his life. And I
Yeah.
assumed, when I met him, his head was shaved, and because I see lots of people with vitiligo on a daily basis, I could see where it was at in his hands and in his face. But it really, from across the room, it was not that noticeable.
So yeah.
But he proceeded to tell me how it affected his life, how he did not date until his 30s, and he feels like he missed out on so much of his life because he didn't he didn't play sports as a kid because he didn't want to try out because he was the kid with the white patches in his hair and the white. So the stigma is there, but when you see somebody of color walk into a room, it's definitely it sticks out,
Right.
and they probably get the questions first. But we see many people of non-color. The actor John Hamm,
Okay.
from
Yeah.
like Mad Men and several other movies. If you look at, if you look, he doesn't wear any makeup. I mean, unless he's acting, you catch him, a picture of him, look at his hands. He has completely no pigment in his hands, and you can see it in his arms, but it's not as noticeable. Joe Rogan, the podcaster, same with him. So, and you see it, we're seeing a lot more people of color, I mean non-color, with it, and speak about it. I think it's great
Yeah.
that I've heard both of them talk about it. So we need some of the people that are of color, and I won't call anybody out, but there's people we know, specifically that we've been working on to speak or give a message, to have them turn up without any makeup on,
Yeah.
which would be wonderful.
Now, do you feel like there's a like divide between people who go out more natural and then those who are always covered up, like the lady who couldn't leave her house?
Yeah, well, this was, now it changed her. So this was a couple of years ago. So now she's out, is out at the conference, and now is out daily without makeup on.
Okay.
And she is somebody who, I'm probably 30% loss of pigment, like my hands and my face, and my knees, but most of the rest of my body, I'm pigmented. So
Okay.
I don't necessarily think about it, but this particular one, she's 100% loss of pigment.
Mm,
So I think
okay.
it also comes to a point where she was going through that transition that made it tough.
Yeah.
But it also comes to a point where you just literally can't cover your whole body in makeup
Right.
as a regular person. I mean, I've heard of people even using things like spray tan and other things, but that's not attainable every single day of your life if you have a job or you have a real job. you can't,
Right.
you can't do that.
Yeah.
So we see the difference and we try to encourage people. Now, I will say, with vitiligo, you have to be careful. The sun is not always our friend, especially if someone of color or anybody, but of color, you have the melatonin and the pigment that absorbs the sun and helps you. It's part of your powers as a black person or person of color. But when you lose that, it does. I will. Most people burn very easily,
Okay.
and with me, I feel temperature. Like, I probably, with no pigment in my hands, I probably feel hot water on my hands faster than someone that had pigment on. So those little things. So we have to be
Yeah.
careful in those aspects. When you're out. But we're hoping, and we can encourage people to be out there,
Yeah.
and also give them the power to be able to answer questions, because there's so many people that don't know what it
Right.
is. When I speak to large groups, I tell them the story when I was 15 years old. My vitiligo had not shown up, but I had a classmate um, who had gotten into some trouble and went to, at the time in the 90s, they called them boys ranches, which were essentially juvenile detention
Right.
centers.
Yeah.
And he spent some time there. And when he returned to school the following year, he had vitiligo, and half of his face was no longer pigmented, but it was just half of his face.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was so many, you would hear the whispers behind him, even from teachers and people and adults, and no one knew what it was. And a lot of people said, at that boys ranch, they experiment on young black
Oh my
boys.
goodness.
And they said, someone poured acid on him when he was there. And so such people started treating him as such, as someone that had been experimented on or had acid poured on him. And he didn't have the tools to know what vitiligo was. He didn't know. He
Right.
couldn't answer the questions. And when people would ask him, he said, well, I don't think anybody experimented on me. And they said, well, how about when you were asleep? What did they put in your water?
Wow.
So and I wish I could go back. He went through all of that time as a young adult, as a teenager and young adult, not knowing what it was. And his family probably didn't have the means to take him to a specialist or a dermatologist to find out at least even the name.
Mm-hmm.
And, unfortunately with him, his story didn't get any better. That trouble continued to manifest and get worse until he was getting into, adult trouble that you can't come back from.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, but I think now, 20 years, 30, 25 years later, that if we had known, or somebody was able to empower him on what he had, how different his life could have possibly
Right.
been. So,
So
and
this
that,
is something that could just show up out of nowhere and you don't know that you have it.
yeah, it could just show up. Now, a higher percentage is sometimes linked to heredity,
Okay.
someone else in your family. But it could just show up, and we don't, and the science has not been behind it to tell us why.
Mm-hmm.
But things affect it. Your diet can exacerbate it. Your stress level. The higher stressed I am, the more pigment I lose. So those things, and I think about the story I just told you. I'm sure he was under a very stressful situation going to a detention center for a year.
Right.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure that it might have been there before, and that's what brought it out. So,
Yeah, I can see that being very stressful for him.
yes, yes, for anybody.
So before we finish up, I do want you to talk to us about Aiden spots
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
that you have.
Have, so we have Aiden Spots. It's actually written by my wife and I, and So before the pandemic, I uh, was was linked to a lot of schools across the southeast that were doing anti-bullying campaigns. So
Okay.
they would have me come speak,
Yeah.
uh, and very rarely did I meet um, a child with vitiligo. Almost never. But during my talk about acceptance and how you can be different and having confidence, so many children would come up to me afterwards and say, I think I'm gay, or I'm being bullied because my family's homeless and other kids know my family's homeless, or
Yeah.
we're having other problems. My parents are gay, or all these other things that were manifesting into them being bullied. So I took some of that, as well as the questions I would get, especially in elementary schools. Were you burned? Did you get hot water on you? Or are all of our skin, is everybody's skin that color under the color? And so I imagined, if I was getting these questions, what would it be like for a child getting these same questions in elementary school?
Right.
And I had the tools to answer them, and a lot of children won't. And from what I've learned, past experience in going to schools, unfortunately, a lot of adults don't.
Yeah.
High schools, I speak about anti-bullying. Teachers come up to me and ask me about vitiligo and say, "Oh, I've never seen that before. I saw somebody in the grocery store. I assumed they were burned badly. Can you tell them?" So we wrote rewrote Aiden's spots as a story of Aiden's first day in school and him getting all of those questions about his vitiligo.
Yeah.
Now, Aiden is, and within the book, Aiden is fortunate enough to have a well-versed teacher who knows about vitiligo and is able to explain it to the classroom, as well as explain it to him. But so it's about, and we wrote it as for young children,
Mm-hmm.
but we wrote it as educational as possible. So there's charts in there, there's graphs. It shows how it affects your pigment, because we want to give them the tools to actually answer the question, but in the simplest form for elementary
Right.
age. We want them to know that it's called vitiligo. We want them to know it affects 1% of the population. We want them to know that you won't catch it if you share a cubby with somebody or share a locker with somebody. You won't catch it if you touch somebody or give them a hug that has vitiligo. So we want them to understand those things, and also from the other lessons I got being in 110 schools, um, the inclusion, that essentially everybody's the same,
Right.
especially as a child. Every child is essentially going through the same angst and questions and issues. So we want to show the inclusion, but also we geared it towards vitiligo. So hopefully this will empower some children and some parents to be able to answer those vitiligo questions.
Yeah.
Because
That's
our
awesome.
goal is, yes, our goal is to get into as many elementary schools, libraries, public libraries as possible. We've already sold to quite a bit of doctors and dermatologists who are buying it to put in their office or to um, give to clients and
Yeah.
patients. So it's to give them, an entertaining story, but also empower them with that message of what vitiligo is, and also that message of inclusion as well.
Yeah. I love that. And when I first saw your book, when you posted it, it made me think of Fresh Dolls. And I don't know if she's out of Atlanta, but she is a Black owned doll maker. Um,
Yeah.
and I was like, if they partnered, like that would be so cool to have the doll to go with the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
I let's make, maybe you can help me make that connection. Let's make that connection. That would be
Okay.
great.
I mean, I don't know her personally. I follow her on social media and
Oh,
have
okay.
reached out to her, but yeah, I'll try my best
Yeah,
to
fresh
continue to
dolls.
get
I'll look her up as well.
yeah. So
That would be great.
she's a doll maker. Um and I thought about it. I was like, man, that would be so cool if they could connect some way and she partnered to make a doll.
I would love that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
work towards making that happen. That would be great.
Yeah, because I just saw the thing that made it click was Barbie just came out with this inclusive line of dolls.
Yes.
And one of their dolls has vitiligo. So
Yes. Yes, I've seen that.
yeah, so I was like, okay, that would be cool if y'all could work together.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm gonna fresh dolls.
Fresh dolls, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to make that happen.
Yeah, and I'll send you the link to her Instagram and everything to make sure it's the right one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm excited for that. Hopefully that partnership can
Yeah.
somehow happen. I recently did an interview with Marissa, who works with Target, different
Oh,
Black owned companies in Target. And there's a couple of doll companies that are Black owned that are in Target. So that's kind of like my next step is to like reach
oh,
out to some of them too. But on Instagram, she's Target While Black, and
okay.
she works with different companies to get them connected to Target to get their stuff in Target.
Wow.
So
Thank you. Target. I will look her up as well, or if you could make that
yeah,
introduction, because we'd love to get the book
yeah,
in
absolutely.
Target as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I will definitely be that, mediator in between to connect you with them. Because
I
I
love
think this is great. I mean, there's a lot of things that we don't think about that affect so many people. But
Yeah.
again, when you hear 1%, it doesn't sound a lot, but it really is a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. You when you think about, and once again, when I give this analogy, not to diminish the seriousness of cancer, but everybody knows someone that has cancer or knows someone who knows someone.
Right,
And
exactly.
and if this year alone in the US diagnosed cancer uh was like 18 million, but vitiligo was like 37. So it's double. Just shows you that there are a lot of people out there with
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will make those connections for you when we are finished.
Thank
But
you.
I absolutely appreciate you taking the time out this afternoon to sit and talk with me about this. I think it's very informative because there were things that I didn't know. Like, for instance, I really thought it was only people of color
Mm.
who were affected by it. So I know that my audience is learning a lot from this, and hopefully they will get the book. Can you let everyone know how they can connect with you after this episode?
Yeah. So the Instagram is no, it's vitiligo.
Okay.
But you can buy Aiden spots on our website, which is spottedskin.com. So SPOTTEDSKIN.com.
Okay.
And you could purchase the books there. And this is the first of, I don't want to say a trilogy, but we have Daddy's Skin, which will release next month. Essentially, is parents explaining to children their vitiligo and their
Cool.
kids. So we're trying to tackle it from all aspects. And now, as I'm a new parent, and I haven't got that question yet, but when it does come, trying to prepare myself, maybe not from your child, but your child has friends that are probably going to ask, why does mom or dad's skin look like that? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. All
So, yeah.
right. So again, thank you so much for coming on. I get this information was very informative. Everyone go out, follow on Instagram, check out the website, go on Amazon. You can find the book, right, on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah. So get that book, take it to your kids' schools for their classroom. If you know someone personally who would benefit from the book, tell them about the book or buy the book.
Great. Thank you. And
All
we
right.
appreciate it.
You're welcome. And that's a wrap on another amazing episode. I know that you were just as inspired as I was after listening to that conversation. And to let us know how we're doing, don't forget to leave us a review, like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow us on all social media platforms, from YouTube to Facebook, at The Color of Influence, and on Instagram, the_color_of_influence. You can check out all of our episodes and additional content on our website, thecolorofinfluence.com, and that's an N only for influence. And don't forget to share the podcast with someone you know, and have them share the podcast with someone they know. Thank you all for listening. Until next time, peace out.